For the past 14 years, Montgomery College has hosted the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference, a celebration of American literature. Coming up, we have an interview with Julia Alvarez, this year's recipient of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award. So please stay with us. Our interview with Julia Alvarez is just ahead. Hello, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Huergo, Professor of English here at Montgomery College. Once again, the college has the pleasure of hosting the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference, which includes workshops, readings, and discussions with noted authors. The highlight of each year's conference is the presentation of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award. Past winners of the award include John Updike, E.L. Doctorow, Norman Mailer, Jane Smiley, Elmore Leonard, Joyce Carol Oates, and many other well-known authors. This year's award is being presented to Julia Alvarez, a fitting addition to this list of honorees. Ms. Alvarez is an extraordinarily versatile writer who has produced best-selling novels, essays, children's books, and poetry, though we may perhaps know her best for the novels How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, In the Time of the Butterflies, In the Name of Salome, and now her latest novel, Saving the World. Welcome, Ms. Alvarez. It's an honor to have you here with us. Please accept our congratulations on receiving the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award for 2009.
Thank you so much.
Bienvenida.
I feel very honored.
Bienvenida. I think we are very honored to have you here. You have been the recipient of important literary prizes, the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award, the ALA's Notable Book of the Year. You've been a finalist for the National Book Critics Award. You're also a dedicated teacher, serving as poet in the schools in Kentucky, Delaware, and North Carolina, and you've certainly been a professor of creative writing and English at Andover Academy, the University of Vermont, the University of Illinois, and Middlebury College. You're so prolific, you are such a versatile writer and have done so much. And the first thing I really wanted to ask you is, what are some of those, as you look back on your professional career, on the trajectory of that career, what do you think are the most pivotal moments?
Well, I think the pivotal moment for me becoming a writer was coming to this country as a 10-year-old. I think that I grew up in a culture that was an oral culture with the world's best storytellers, but it was not a literary culture. I didn't grow up in a family where I saw people reading. You know, anybody who would separate themselves to do something as antisocial as read a book, that was, unheard of. So I never grew up with the sense that I was going to be reading books. I didn't like books. Books were boring. They were at school where we were learning things by rote in a dictatorship. They were not something that I wanted access to. But it was coming to this country as a 10-year-old, having to learn English and pay attention. You know, when you learn your native tongue, you learn it intuitively, instinctively as a kid. But
Right.
When you're learning it and you're a little older a language, you have to be thinking, why are they saying it this way instead of that way? Why that word instead of that word? What's the little shade of difference between amiable and friendly? You're learning these things, which as a writer you have to relearn even with your own language when you become a writer. So I think learning the language, having to be attentive to it, also coming from a very tribal, extended familia, very, belonging to this group, and suddenly being the outsider, having kids, make fun of our accents and tell us to go back to where we came from. I was thrown back on my own resources, and I had to find something inside myself. And at that point, I happened to meet up with a good teacher, a public library, and something that I didn't know. Those stories I used to love to hear from abuelita and la tía, suddenly they were in books. My idea of books was these boring textbooks, but the stories were inside there. The only catch was you had to become a reader to access them. And once I figured out that there was a wonderful world of story in there, I became a reader. So I think that experience of immigration and of learning English in a more, as an older speaker, really turned me into a reader, which is the beginning of being a writer, and then into a writer. And I think if I were to get the second part of that, the other experience, I was writing, and that was before Latino literature or multicultural literature. I mean, women's literature was just starting to come about, and I just didn't see, I didn't see or read books that were like the ones that were inside me. So I thought that wasn't American literature. I thought that, you know, that was sociology, so that I didn't belong. The stories I had to tell didn't belong in the literature of this country. And then I read Maxine Hong Kingston, The Woman Warrior. I think it came out in 76 or 78. And I thought, oh my God, this is a beautiful book. This is American literature. And it's about a Chinese American woman, but it might as well be me, a Dominican American woman, because I associated and identified with those dual worlds. So those two were really the big experiences, I think, on becoming a writer.
And when were you able to couple that desire to be a writer with a social purpose? Because a lot of the poets that you like so much, that you quote, for example, in the epigraph to Saving the World, Seamus Heaney, the whole idea of being able to write in order to help others, and that literature somehow has a momentum and a quality of lifting people up, lifting their consciousness, developing their consciousness. When did that become really important to you? You have so many things, for example, stories, not just saving the world, but for example, in Return to Sender, there you're helping immigrant Mexican children, migrant children, understand what's happening to them. So there's such a strong social purpose. When did that happen for you?
Well, you know, I don't do it consciously, of thinking that there's a social purpose to what I write. However, I think that seeing clearly is very revolutionary.
Yeah.
You know, I think Chekhov says the task of the writer is not to solve the problem, but to state it correctly. I think when we see with clarity something in its full complexity, not flatly, not the either-ors of politics and dogma and slogans and propaganda, but when we see the full complexity of someone, when we read and become someone else, I mean, that is an amazing, amazing social moment. I mean, a social activist moment. You're becoming someone else. You're walking in their shoes. You're understanding what it is to be them. And that in itself is something radical that stories allow us to do. So I think stories always have had this, you know, this social platform, this political platform, but it's not in the sense of converting you to X point of view.
It's not propaganda.
It's not propaganda. It's allowing you to see your full humanity and the full humanity of others. And if that isn't at the root of real change, I don't know what is. So I think it's something that stories do. It's not something that Alvarez does or Grace Paley does or Margaret Randall or Tolstoy. It's something, or Neruda, it's something that's at the basis of what literature is about.
And storytelling.
And storytelling is about. Okay. And remember, I came to storytelling out of that kind of a political and social moment of being the outcast, of not being the one that was going to be allowed in, of being the one that came from, you know, escaping from a dictatorship and landing in the playground where the kids were bullies, and it didn't seem to me like there was much difference between these two places. And then I found at the table of literature a place that was the table set for all. You know, everybody was welcome. It only enriches all of our legacy of all the stories in the world when someone else joins and tells a story that only they can tell. And so from the beginning, that's where I wanted to be, that table. Not the United States of America, but between the covers of a book, where the true democracy that we were looking for in the country, I found in reading, really.
Well, it's really interesting. I'm picking up on a couple of things. One is that you've written, for example, in the time of the butterflies, that's such a political story. It is the story of the Mirabal sisters who were murdered basically by the Trujillo regime. That's such a political story, literally. And then when you're talking about something to declare, even that idea of being in between, that sense of moving between cultures, being at the, what is it called in Spanish, the aduana, right? That place where you're standing and declaring, this is what I'm carrying in my luggage, this is what I'm transiting, crossing with. And it's such a powerful idea, this sense of being in between. And I've read comments where you've talked about that sense of being Dominican American,
right?
You know, and that hyphenated space. And is there anything that you could sort of comment on? I know I've thrown a few things out at you.
Well, you know, I think that that space of in between, which is a very uncomfortable place, is the place where stories begin. You know, people always say, well, where do you get your ideas? And I think, an idea, my gosh, if an idea came to my door and knocked, I'd shut the door and run the other way, an idea. But where I get inspired is the pebble in my shoe. You know, something happens that unsettles you, which means, therefore, desprender, you know, that verb in Spanish. It takes you out of your little rut or your little embedded self, and you're out of it.
Unleashed.
And seeing because you're between worlds, so you see things that sometimes you don't see when you're embedded and in the routine. So I think a lot of writers start from that, you know, from that sense of being suddenly outside and in between and unsettled.
And looking in.
And looking in and looking back and trying to make sense of things, you know, that seem suddenly not, you know, inchoate. So I think that's a space to begin. And I think, you know, in terms of the Mirabal sisters and writing about them, again, I didn't begin with the politics of it. I began with the characters. You know, the people say, well, why didn't you write a biography? A novel is the truth according to character. A novel doesn't mean that it's fiction, that you made it up. It just means that your perspective is character. A biography or a history book, your perspective is the facts, you know, the record that you want to convey. But when you're talking about the way we all experience history in our own moment is through character, through the lens of ourselves. Well, so in a way, a historical novel, you know, a fiction, is a better way, in a sense, to approach history from the point of view of those characters. So I really began with curiosity about the sisters, the Mirabal sisters. Why did these three young women
fight that fight?
Fight that fight. How did they get involved? Weren't they terrified? They had kids. They were wives. They were sisters. You know, how did it all happen? So I think that's where I began. And in telling their story, it's a political story because we're all political animals. I mean, politics doesn't mean we're just to the left. You know, we are also characters in community. Right. And that's instantly a politics. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is this wonderful moment in Once Upon a Quinceanera, coming of age in the USA, that I wanted to read very briefly, and I was hoping I could get your reaction to it. No matter how far I traveled down the paths my education at Abbott might open, I needed to keep coming back to where I had come from, to drink at the springs of my culture, practice my Spanish and merengue, and feel grateful for the time spent with my father, a physician with an office in Brooklyn, in a world that was neither here nor there, which was probably why he didn't care where he was buried, why he always seemed homesick, no matter where he was.
Right.
Because in-betweenness can be a creative force for some people, for other people.
Yeah, I think that, you know, this is from Once Upon a Quinceanera, which actually is the only book I've ever done that was commissioned. Penguin wanted me to do a book. They were putting together authors with a social topic, and so they picked me to do the Latino topic. And I thought, I always get nervous when they do that, you know, because we're a varied group.
Yeah.
And a Latino topic, I mean, how about being a human being as a you know, a Latino topic? So I said, well, what's the topic? Thinking immigration, something hefty. And they said, the quinceañera. And I said, come on, you're kidding. The quinceañera? And they said, yeah, you know, it's wildly popular, and you know, it's something abuelita wants, the young girl wants, mommy wants, you know, it's really booming business here, and we're curious about it. I said, well, I don't think I'm the right person, but I started going to a few of them, and I realized this is a lens again through which to see what's happening to us as a Latino community in this country. And then the editor said, why don't you bring in some passages about your coming of age? And I was, some parts in the book are about working in my father's office in a Spanish area of Brooklyn, after wanting to become Americanized, like normal old immigrant kid, and suddenly realizing that there was something there that I wasn't getting as I was getting all the advantages of an education, and that I couldn't cut myself off from that or I would die. Now, I think the difference from someone like Papi, who came as in his 40s to this country, is that he had already come of age. He was not reinventing himself as you are when you're coming up. That he had already become a person in one world, and now he was in this world where he just couldn't quite belong except in this little area of Brooklyn. And if he were to go back, he no longer belonged there because he had moved away. So, you know, there are these casualties as you move between worlds, because it's not just, you know, it's not just a great journey, you know, with a great resolution of happiness. People ask me, why did I name How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents? Why did I give it that title? Was I saying that people should, that assimilation was great? And I said, well, first of all, novels don't have messages. They don't say, this is the message, because life is always more complex, and that's what it's interested in. But, you know, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents is, you lose some things along the way.
You gain and you lose.
And you gain some things. And some of the things you lose are, you know, these abuelitos and these parents, and, you know, that belong in this other world, and that you can never be their daughter in the way that you would have been within that home culture. You know, and you know that the more, I mean, Hunger of Memory by Richard Rodriguez talks about this. You know, and many Latinos took issue with the book because they think he's saying assimilation is the way to go. And I think he comes down stronger on that side than I do. But I really think what he's talking about is what happens in that trajectory of the generations as you become assimilated in this culture. What is lost, you know, that you never quite belong back there.
Which explains, I think, for me, the elegiac tone, that sense of La Golondrina that I heard in that passage, because it is something gained, but also something lost. And I really wanted to ask you, in terms of being a writer, if that Golondrina, that swallow figure, ever is, how important that is to you, whether that's something you keep coming back to.
It's interesting because when I was working on Return to Sender, that's the epigraph in the book is from La Golondrina. And I first heard that song as a kid. You know, it was a popular song that would be sung and people would instantly start to weep because there's something about homelessness. The song is about the swallow that goes back and forth in its migration patterns, and that it might get lost in the blowing wind. You know, and that's always the danger of the journey. And I think that part of being hybrid, you know, I tell my students at Middlebury College, my Latino students, we're the bridge people, you know, and you could also call us the Golondrina people. We go from one culture to another, but in that trajectory, we create bridges through which other people can come back and forth. And it makes it hard for us, because sometimes we feel so stretched that we think we're going to snap. And sometimes we do snap. And sometimes we do get lost. Once Upon a Quinceañera is about how lost I got as a teenager, because you're trying to negotiate such different worlds. But if you can create those kinds of passages like the Golondrina and create bridges. I tell my students, we are the people of the 21st century. The world needs more and more of us who can make these connections and knit us together as a human family, and we need to come together to resolve some of these huge global problems, or we're not going to survive, you know.
We have such a large population of Latino students here at Montgomery College. Is there anything that you would advise them, that you would, in terms of this seemingly endless transit that we're in, and this bridge building?
It is difficult. I mean, my heart goes out to my Latino students because I realize that they're negotiating, you know, such different worlds.
It's a great world, a great word.
Yeah, and try not to betray themselves or their culture, please their parents, but also find the deep springs that it will, you know, really fuel them for the rest of their lives. And sometimes those are at variance, and it's really difficult. But I think, you know, I think one of the liberating things for my students to hear is there isn't a prescription. You know, you don't have to be this kind of a combination in order to be a real Latina or a real American. You get to make the kinds of balances that are right for you, you know. And for some, it's to really be heavily into their parents' culture and their country of origin, and only, you know, do brief excursions into the greater America to stay within their comunidades. Some people, it's to go out there and be a representative of that culture. You know, whatever combination. There isn't a right and wrong, and parents want to tell us that this is the right combination for being una muchacha decente, una muchacha educada, and, you know, your other culture is saying in order to be a career woman, you have to, you know, you have to show up even if papi's enfermo en el hospital. You know, your commitment is to your career. No, you have to make those balances yourself. But the main thing is that you find your calling. You know, I teach at a college where the students are very competitive, very ambitious. The parents are very ambitious for them. They want them to get out of college and get excellent jobs where they're going to be important, earn a lot of money, they're going to be impressive. And I say, forget that. Find your calling.
Right.
Find the thing in you that you are passionate about and make that into your career.
I think most of them really struggle with a very deep-seated sense of betrayal, that to do one thing or another is to betray their parents, to betray their first language, to betray where they came from. And I think some of them do struggle with that.
And I think females too, because as in our original cultures, you know, our Latino culture, we were the caretakers. Right. We're supposed to stay home and take care of the family and help out. You know, even though our parents come here and they want our education and they want us to be ready to survive in this culture, these are centuries old, you know, currents that are running through them, and they run through us too. So it's difficult. You know, it's inside us too. It's not just from our parents. Right. But we have to, it's like when I talked about the Quinceanera, you know, how do we take this tradition, which is wildly popular, and not just throw it out because it's not appropriate in this culture? How do we turn the Quinceanera into a coming-of-age ceremony that prepares our girls to be women in the culture now that they find themselves in? Right. It was appropriate to prepare them to be wives and mothers in the old culture, and that was, the Quinceanera was an announcement that the girl was ready for that life. But how do we take this moment, you know, and the you know, year preceding it to really prepare our girls to be the women that are the strong, you know, powerful, caretaking women of their community and their country in the here and now. So it's difficult, and they need people like us, you know, to model for them that it can be done, to help them make some of those transitions, sometimes to call the parents and you know, comfort them and say, she's going to be fine, you know, because they see you as a role model. And if you can be the one that helps them I think it's so important for Latino students to have that.
I think you're the one who's helping all of us in transit, actually, I would say. I think that what you're offering us as you're speaking, I'm getting a picture of Alma in my mind. I'm getting a picture of these of Isabel and Alma in Saving the World, who are very much in transit. So I feel that you're speaking to all of us, and it is with great gratitude that I just really wanted to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very,
for
very
having
much.
me. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Ms. Alvarez, it has been wonderful to see you here. It's wonderful that you've taken the time to be here with us today. We're grateful for the many insights you've shared with us, and of course, congratulations on receiving the 2009 F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award.
Thank you.
Thank
Gracias.
you. De nada. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. In addition to this interview, Montgomery College Television will also be airing major portions of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference, so be sure to check with the MCTV website for air dates and times. Thank you.